My father, when he was going through college at Cal Poly, he had a professor that had a 200-point final. 199 questions were true, and the very last one was false.
Yeah. I would just like psych myself out. That's not.
Well, he said there was a kid that just thought he was lucky. He filled in every single one true, walked out with the highest grade in the class.
Wow.
Because it was he had a final and that was it. And the kid was like, I didn't show up to anything else, so no way I could do it.
Oh, but it was one of those classes where if you ace the final, you get a passing grade in the class.
Well, I mean, it worked. Right, so that would suck though if you like cried.
That guy, that
You
one
showed up
time.
once.
Professor Talkie, do you know any of the computer science programming professors at Saxon by any chance?
No, I did not. Would you by any chance is inquiring about Dixon?
No. It's a professor. I went on Rate My Professor, and it was all CISW.
Okay.
Whatever, web programming, but she had horrible reviews, but there was no CISP.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if that
Would that be Sandy Fetter?
The reason is because I'm taking 421 and in DE in the fall.
Okay.
So there's no way I could take a 360 class here.
I see. Well, I don't know for sure because I have not taken any classes from that professor before. I know her only as a colleague and as a colleague of a different campus, so I can't really tell you much about it. The best chance is to ask people around here and see who has taken classes from her and get a first-hand account on the way she teaches and whether her teaching style will match your learning style. In the end, it's really a match, because some people learn differently and they learn better from certain types of professors. And
Have you checked your Rate My Professor?
I try not to look.
You're like a 4.4 out of 5. You're like super highly rated.
Not as much as Carol Lever. Okay.
That doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
I think at the end of the day, I really don't care about the Rate My Professor's rating. It really what matters to me is whether Damon Antos or Iraj, subsidiary, will come back to me and say, your students are underprepared for this class because this is a prep class for cisp360, and that really is the bottom line. Is am I preparing you guys well enough to get into that class and be successful in that particular class, and also learn things that will be useful throughout your programming career. I mean, that really is the bottom line. I mean, people can be happy if I just give everybody a good grade and throw a party and I will bring cookies and it's all good.
That's the reason that I was going to take Zarzana next semester for 401 Chems, but everyone's like, she doesn't prepare you for anything, so don't take that class. I was like,
yeah, because that really is the bottom line when you're taking a class. The grade is important. I mean, we all want to end up with a good GPA and all that. But in the end, your GPA is only lasting up to a certain point. I mean, the effectiveness of your GPA or the usefulness, the shelf life of your GPA is limited. But what you're learning from a class, sometimes there are things you can learn from a class that will outlast that particular class and a few more semesters and a few more years after that too. So I think that really is what matters the most. Is what is the shelf life of what you're learning in a class.
yeah.
Right. Yep, go ahead.
Do you and the other instructors for 360, do you guys get together and say, okay, this is how we're going to design the class? Or each one does its own thing and you show us what they plan on doing? Or how does that work?
Well, that's an interesting question. We do talk, occasionally, because, Iraj is right next to me in terms of the office. And then Damon just kind of walks by and we kind of chat, occasionally. This class used to be a Pascal class. We use Pascal to prepare students for C and C++ programming. And then later on, I think as a statewide movement, we are all moving to pseudocode and not use a particular programming language. But since I know how to program in C2, and I teach the class right after the C++ programming class, so I kind of know what you would need to know to get into a C and C++ class. And that's why I teach the class in a particular way, basically so that you have what you need to know to be successful in a C and C++ class. But we do talk, I get feedback from those other professors too. Like, Damon will give me some feedback, like, your students are doing blah, blah, blah in my class, and, he will give me some suggestions, maybe to expand on certain topics or to shrink on certain topics and stuff like that. I get feedback from teachers Carol Lever, who teaches web scripting. And the interesting feedback from her was that, she can easily tell who took cisp300 prior to the web scripting class. May not from me, may or may not from me. Because the web scripting class has no programming class prerequisite. In other words, to get into PHP programming or JavaScript programming or Ajax programming, you do not need to have a programming cisp300 as a prerequisite. But the nature of that kind of scripting will, I think a student can definitely benefit from a programming class like this to get the concepts out of the way before getting into the HTML, the CSS, and all the other stuff that is specific to web page generation. So yes, we do talk, informally, but not like, in a very formal sense of, oh, let's compare, grades of students, because we are not allowed to. This is a privacy issue. I cannot ask, Raj and say, okay, here's some of my students in my class, I want to know how well they're doing in your class. I cannot ask those questions. It's a privacy issue.
Could you aggregate them, like say, okay, I have this many?
Probably, once we say, okay, this is a collection of, 20 students who took your class, and as a group, this is the average in my class. I guess, in that case, it would be okay because I cannot individually identify this is the grade of a particular student.
Could you get people's permissions to do like a study?
That would be interesting. That would be interesting. But I think the state law kind of prohibits that too, because they don't want people to come back and say, no, I did not sign it. And you cannot sign away certain rights either. Yep.
You can go to ratemyprofessor.com and structure your classes accordingly based on the response of the students' feedback?
No, not really.
They ended up changing it where you can actually comment back.
Yeah, you can
Professors will
Right.
comment back.
I've seen a video feedback too, like certain professors will kind of, comment on the comments about them and say, no, I didn't do that, or I did it for a reason, or whatever. Right.
They have a best of.
Best of. Best of the feedback?
No, best of Professor Strike Back.
Oh.
I guess some professors get on there and get really angry.
I've seen some pretty angry professors.
I know of a few angry professors. I know of a few colleagues, who I will kind of hesitate to take a class from, not because I may not learn anything, but because I might get personal injury.
Grievous bodily harm.
You can go over the homework too.
Hmm?
You can go over the homework too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Just remind me after this one. All right. So let's go ahead and go over the questions in the exam. Okay. What do you guys think of the exam, just overall speaking?
That was easier.
Okay. Well, there are no pre and post conditions. I think that's a relief to a lot of people. But in the end, the analysis of the pre and post condition is beneficial. It's just, it takes time to kind of build up the expertise and the knowledge that you need to analyze the program. So that's kind of like an exposure thing, mostly.
It's a useful method.
Sorry?
It's a useful method, but it's going to take time to.
Right. It takes time to absorb that information. Basically the best way to learn is to learn from mistakes, right? So when you're actually writing a long, huge program and your program is not working the way it's supposed to, then you're forced to use the skills that you're forced to develop the skill at that point, and then you start to click, oh, okay, so this is the kind of thing that I learned in the past. Now it is being applicable, being useful. All right, so this is the first question. I will save the file first into today's folder. I'll just call that Q1. Is it different?
No.
No, I think that's the right question. All right, so I'm just gonna fill up the columns here. Okay, line number, we got I, X, and then A is an array of 7 digits. And I do hope that everybody remember to initialize the array using the student ID, because otherwise it will be pretty hard to grade it. Okay, I and X start with unknown values, and A is supposed to start with a particular student ID. I'll just go ahead and invent one. Okay, a particularly kind of random type. 1, 2, 4, 5, 2, 7, 9, 1. Okay. I hope it doesn't coincide with one actual student ID in the class. Just like last time, I picked a random number, to be a prime, to be a number to test the prime thing. It's like, wow, that's actually a prime number. What are the chances? Because prime numbers get less and less frequent as the number gets larger and larger. So I just so happened to pick a random number that was prime.
That's actually a very good question. What were the chances of you picking a prime number out of all those numbers?
I do not know. I do not know the answer to that one. Okay, so let's trace this particular program. Starting on line 1, I gets a value of 0. On line 2, X gets a value of 0. Just initializations of the 2 variables. On line 3, we have to evaluate the condition. I is less than bar A bar. In this case, I is 0, bar A bar is 7, because we got 7 elements in the array. So this is true. And then we go through the loop, go into the loop on line 4. Line 4 is going to update X. Okay, so we are picking X times 10 first. X is 0, X times 10 is 0. And we're adding a bracket I to it. I is 0, a bracket I has a value of 1. So in the end, we end up with a 1 in X. Is that part okay? All right. Okay, so once line 4 is done, we go to line 5. Line 5 is the beginning of a conditional statement. So we have to evaluate a bracket I mod 2 equals to 0. In this case, it's false. 1 mod 2 has a remainder of 1. So 1 equals to 0 is false. Okay. So we skip around the entire conditional statement. We end up on line 8. Line 8 is just adding 1 to I. I goes from 0 to 1. Then we go back to the beginning of the loop on line 3. So right now I can already talk about some grading criteria. I'm going to grade based on whether people can follow a loop. In other words, after line 8, you have to go back to the beginning of the loop. So that's definitely one of the things that I will be grading on. Being able to update X correctly is also something that I'm looking for. So let's move back to line 3 and continue. I is 1, 1 is less than 7 is true. We continue with this loop on line 4. This time on line 4, a bracket I is referring to a bracket 1, which has a value of 2. But before we do anything, we have to multiply X by 10. X is 1, 1 times 10 is 10, 10 plus 2 is 12, so X will end up with a value of 12. Are we still doing okay so far? Okay. Then we move on to line 5, which is the conditional part of a conditional statement. This time it is true because 2 mod 2 has a remainder of 0. So this is now true. I have no choice but to move on to line 6, which is inside the conditional statement. It adds 1 to I first. Whoops. I guess I plus 1, it is 2. Then I get out of the conditional statement onto line 8, and then I gets incremented again to 3. Okay? So is that okay? Yeah. All right. After line 8, we move back to line 3. I is now 3. 3 is less than 7 is still true. Moving on to line 4. And this time I'm looking at a bracket 3, which also has a value of 2. So this becomes 122 because it is 12 times 10, which is 120, and then plus a bracket 3, which also has a value of 2. So 120 plus 2 is 122. Then we move on to line 5. A bracket I mod 2 is 0 is true again. We get to line 6. We add 1 to I first. I goes from 3 to 4. And then we get out of the conditional statement onto line 8. I gets incremented yet again to 5. We get back to line 3. The condition is still true. So I is less than bar, A bar is still true. Get to line 4. Now it becomes, I have to add I have to multiply 122 by 10, which is 1220, and then plus the value of A bracket I. I has a value of 5, so we are looking at a value of 9 in this case. So now we end up with 1229 in variable x. We get to line 5. A bracket I mod 2 equals to 0 is false in this case because 9 mod 2 has a value of 1, not 0. So we skip around the entire conditional statement. We end up on line 8. We just add 1 to I. I goes from 5 to 6. We get back onto line 3. I is less than bar, A bar is still true because 6 is less than 7. Then we get to line 4. And okay, we have to kind of split the screen now so we can see both top and the bottom portion. There we go. All right, so we are back onto line 4. And line 4 wants to multiply x by 10, so it becomes 12,290. And then plus A bracket I has a value of 6, which has a value of 1. So now we end up with 12291 as variable x. Then we go to line 5. Line 5 evaluates whether A bracket I mod 2 equals to 0. That is false because 1 mod 2 is 1 and 1 does not equal to 0. We skip around the whole thing to line 8. Line 8 is adding 1 to I. I goes from 6 to 7. We go back onto line 3. I is less than bar, A bar is now finally false. And that means we get out of the loop. We end up at post and we're done. So are there any questions about this particular trace? It's tedious, okay, but there are several things that I'm looking for. Array indexing is a big one. The update of X reflects whether someone can follow the array because the digits are all coming from the array. The structure, following the structure of the code, that the conditional statement is inside the loop, and we have to go back to the beginning of the loop at the end of the loop. Those are all important concepts that I'm looking for. Yep.
Well, if your student ID number contained all the even numbers, this was pretty easy for you.
Correct. So there is a certain part of this, that depends on chance, where some students may not have to go through as many iterations. That's correct.
Like the matching. Like the matching one.
You like the matching one?
I didn't have to match the row.
The matching one actually had a bug in it, so I will accept 2 alternative results. When we get to that one, we'll talk about it. All right, let's make a new one. Sorry?
Oh, no.
Okay, so let's move on to question number 2. So this time, everybody gets the same question, but the trace will be different because it depends on your student ID. All right. I get 0, x gets false. Okay, so this one is kind of interesting because x is no longer a variable that stores an integer or numerical value. Yep, go ahead.
What's 0 mod? What's the 0 mod?
Was it 0?
What's the 0 mod? 0 mod 2 is what? Still 2.
0 mod 2 is 0 because it's the remainder of 0 divided by 2.
But you can't divide.
You can't do 2 mod 0.
Now 2 mod 0 doesn't make any sense because
Right,
anything divided by 0 is undefined. But 0 mod 2 makes sense because it's basically saying, I have no candy. I have to split my candies between 2 kids. And how many candies do I have left? Right? I got 0 left. And the kids don't get anything either.
No candy for anyone.
No candy for anyone because there was no candy to begin with. Okay, so not x is basically the negation of the value of the variable in this case. I is less than bar is the second condition. Do x gets x or a bracket I mod 3 equals to 0.
I think mine is pretty clear. I'm pretty sure the worst thing about this test was like lining up everything. Like that was the worst thing.
Yeah, the grid did not show through very
Yeah.
well.
I was like afraid I was gonna have one of them like pointed down slightly and then.
I did not enable the toner save feature of my printer, but yet the lines are very faint.
I barely had any lines at all. Like a vague shadow.
All right, so let's take a look at this code first, before we trace it. A value is a value. Okay, if a variable stores a Boolean value, that's basically the value of the variable. And so, if a variable is storing a Boolean value, then you can use it anywhere you expect a Boolean value. Okay, so in this case, on line 4, it's perfectly okay to have x or blah 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 on the right hand side of an assignment because it evaluates to another true/false value, and then you just use that value to update, in this case, variable x, and you're done. Do you guys have any questions back there? Do you have any question?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Because I can hear you from here, so I thought you might have a question. Sorry?
No, you're good.
All right. Okay. Because if I can hear you, so can everybody else. Because this is kind of like the furthest point, from you in the classroom. Yeah. And I don't even have sensitive hearing. Yeah. All righty. Let's trace this one. Does anyone want to pick a particularly difficult student ID?
One that's not divisible by 3.
I should just say one.
Yep, exactly. That would make it difficult.
1, 7, 4, 5.
Comments, line number I, X, A. Yeah, but the most difficult case, does not illustrate, how to get out using short-circuited evaluation. If you read the front cover of the test, it says specifically when you trace the code, you have to demonstrate that you are using short-circuited evaluation. And you can choose any way to display that you understand that concept. One way is to only evaluate one side and then you come to a conclusion. The value of the expression is blah. You can use other ways and say, okay, circle the other part and say this is not evaluated because we don't have to. So there are multiple ways, depending on how you want to do it. But there has to be some kind of indication that you understand how to use short-circuited evaluation. And then we'll go ahead and do the same trick here. Make these columns a little bit narrower so we can see everything. Almost there. There we go. All right, so the precondition is we don't know anything about X or I, and then the student ID. I'll just pick something that will go a little bit further, and then we'll stop, early, just so that we can tell. Oh, that won't do it. We'll put a 6 here, so that will stop it to down there. Okay. So this is my test case. I hope it doesn't coincide with somebody's actual student ID. Does it match, anyone's student ID? It'll be pretty unlikely. Okay. Okay. Line 1, I gets a value of 0. Line 2, X gets a value of false. Okay. So I just put an F here, to represent false. So certain things I won't give any points, these steps, these particular steps are not worth any points because by this time, I'm just going to assume that everybody knows how to do this already. On line 3, we have to evaluate the condition, not X. All right, well, this time because we have a conjunction, it is important to ask the question, do we have to evaluate any further? What is X? X has a value of false. What is not false? True. With a conjunction, if I know one side is true, can I conclude the whole thing has to be blah, 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 and stop here? Okay, so I have to continue in this case. So we have to say and I is less than bar a bar. I has a value of 0, bar a bar has a value of 7, and that is true. So we have true and true, which is true. So the end result of this is it is true. We have to move on into the loop here, which is on line 4. Line 4 is, you have to use short circuit evaluation, but since I did not say that you have to use the comments to show how you come to the result, it's okay if you don't show me short circuit evaluation in this case. Okay, so when you look at line 4 on the right hand side of the assignment, x has a value of false at this point. I cannot, conclude the new value yet, because with a disjunction, if one side is false, you cannot know the entire result yet. We have to evaluate the other side. A bracket I is a bracket 0 has a value of 1. 1 mod 3 is 1, so it becomes false or false in this case, which is false. So that means you still have to tell me that it is false, because you still have to evaluate the condition. On line 5, we add 1 to I. Back to on line 3, this is still true because x is still false and I is still less than bar a bar because I only has a value of 1. Moving on to line 4 again. So for the most part with this one, I cannot really tell how it is computed, because you're not required to use comments on line 4. But I can tell, when you stop, then I can tell whether you're actually evaluating the conditions correctly.
5 is 2.
Oh, moving on. Adding 1 to it.
Yeah, take 5 down.
Line 4. This time we're looking at a bracket 2. A bracket 2 has a value of 5. 5 mod 3 is 2, and 2 equals to 0 is false. So once again, we have false or false, which is also false. And so x is updated again to a value of false. Go to line 5. We bump the value of I by 1 to 3. Go back to line 3. This condition is still true. Go to line 4 again. This time we are looking at a bracket 3, which has a value of 1. We did that already, so a mod 3 is not 0. Okay. Go back to line 3. This is still false. Go to line 4 again. This time it is true, because the left-hand side of the disjunction of line 4 is still false, but the right-hand side of the disjunction is a bracket I, and a bracket I this time is a bracket 4. A bracket 4 is column I. Column I has a value of 6. 6 mod 3 is 0, because 6 divided by 3 has a remainder of 0. 0 equals to 0 is true. False or true is true. So the right-hand side of the assignment is true, and that's why x is going to be updated with a value of true. But we are not exiting the loop at this point. Okay, it is very important not to go to post like right away. You have to finish up the rest of the code. So you still have to go to line 5, because line 5 is right after line 4. So you still have to bump up the value of I by 1 to 5. Then you get back onto line 3, and then this time this evaluates to false. This is the way I would do it. I would just say not x is false, because x is true, not x is false, and therefore it's done. Now you don't have to do it this way. You can basically say not x and blah 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 is false, and then you can just circle the part and say, okay, this part does not have to be evaluated because of short-circuited evaluation. So you just have to give me some kind of indication that you are short-circuiting the evaluation. Yep.
What if we didn't do that?
Then you lose some points, because it is one of the concepts that I'm trying to test, and it is in the first page that that I needed that kind of indication. All right. So after this, we just get to post, and this is all done. All right. Now there is an importance to short-circuited evaluation, because without short-circuited evaluation, some code can be broken, as we have already shown in the class. In the C and C++ class, with short-circuited evaluation, you can also see that the side effect of whatever is on the right-hand side, sometimes it won't take into effect because it's not even evaluated. So that's why it is important to understand the concept of short-circuit evaluation, because it can change the outcome of the result, whether you have or whether you use or do not use short-circuit evaluation. I'm sorry, but you cannot eat during the class. Okay. I shouldn't say that. I should have said no one can eat in the class. So it's not just you. I cannot either.
Although I think you could get away with it.
Only with water.
That would not be a good thing, would it?
Only with water, right?
It's in that case it would be an abuse of power.
Yeah, because that never happens.
I try not to let it happen.
Oh, well,
That's why you said like a 4.5 on rate micro. You're good for that.
Just sticking to rules for no reason. All right, so moving on to question number 3. Now, question number 3, let me just write the code first, and then you guys, it's a short program. This is how it goes. I gets 0, while I is less than bar A bar minus 1. Okay, this one does exit a little bit early, but that's a reason why it has to be bar A bar minus 1. A bracket I plus 1. So in this particular one, we are updating elements in the array as we go through the loop. Okay. I gets minus 1. While, okay, that's the entire code for the third question. And for this one, it doesn't matter how your student ID looks like. You still have to go through the same number of iterations, because none of this, or the exit condition itself, does not depend on the value of the elements in the array. Now, on the other hand, if your student ID is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, the chances of having a mistake would be much lower, because you would just be adding 0 to 0, ending up with a 0 all the time. However, since you're in this class, I'm counting on the fact that basic arithmetic is not a challenge.
I think the most difficult part of this one was the constant indexing, because you had to index to one value, and then remember that you had to index to a different value and add that value to the original.
Correct. Yes, that becomes that's one of the things where you have to kind of keep track of. Is I'm referring to the same column, but that column has been updated by a previous step, so you have to use the latest value of that column. So that, yeah, we'll see it. We'll definitely see what is important in this case. Still have comments, but this time is really kind of easy to deal with it. Line number, we got I, there's no X anymore. Array A has the same thing, 7 elements. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and just make a random student ID here. All right. I can be unknown to begin with, and this is my precondition. Line 1 starts with initializing I to 0. Line 2, bar A bar minus 1 is 6. 0 is less than 6 is true. Line 3. So this time, line 3 is very important, because there are a few things I'm looking for. In this case, I is 0. So on the right-hand side of the assignment, A bracket I refers to A bracket 0, which has a value of 1. A bracket I plus 1 close bracket. Now that one, you have to evaluate I plus 1 first. Okay, I is 0, I plus 1 is 1. So okay, let me just kind of point out which one I'm talking about here. This part here, I is 0, I plus 1 becomes 1. So A bracket I plus 1 close bracket refers to A bracket 1, and A bracket 1 has a value of 0 in this case. So it becomes 1 plus 0, which is 1. But what you're updating here on the left-hand side of the assignment is A bracket I plus 1, I is 0 again, so you're actually updating column E to a value of 1. Is that part okay? Does kind of everybody understand this part? So we are not updating a particular variable, we are updating an element in the array in this case. Line 4, typical thing, just add 1 to the index that controls which element I'm looking at for the next iteration. Then we go back to line 2, I is less than bar A bar minus 1 is still true. Go to line 3, and this time we have to update F, and it becomes 1 plus 4, and this one becomes 5. Okay, so let's go through this step by step, okay, one step at a time. We are evaluating line 3 again. This time I has a value of 1. A bracket I, which is A bracket 1, refers to the current value at that time, which is 1. A bracket I plus 1, you have to evaluate I plus 1 first. I has a value of 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. So that means it is equivalent to A bracket 2 in this case, and A bracket 2 has a value of 4 to begin with. 1 plus 4 is 5, and then the 5 is used to update the left-hand side. Once again, the left-hand side is referring to A bracket I plus 1, I is 1, so A bracket I plus 1 close bracket refers to A bracket 2, and that's why column F is the one that is updated to a value of 5. Is that okay? All right. After line 3, we increment I by 1, it goes from 1 to 2, go back to line 2, and then we have basically the same condition. It is still true because 2 is less than 6. Go to line 3. I think you're picking up the pattern now. This is basically 5 plus 9, which is 14. And then we move on to line 4. We add 1 to I again. Go back to line 2. The exit condition, or the stay in loop condition, is still true. Go back to line 3. And now it is 14 plus 4, which is 18. I mean, at this point, it's really just chore, just going through all the elements. And then we go to line 4. We add 1 to I goes from 3 to 4. Then we get back to line 2. This condition is still true because 4 is less than 6. Go to line 3 again. This is 18 plus 6, which is 24. Go to line 4. This is now 5. I is incremented to 5. Go back to line 2. 5 is less than 6 is true. We have one more iteration to go. Go back to line 3. This is now 24 plus 3, which is 27. And then we move on to line 4. This is now 6. We get back to line 2. I is 6. A bracket bar A bar is 7. Minus 1 is 6. 6 is less than 6 is false. So at this time, this expression, or the exit, or the stay in loop condition is false. And so we get out of the loop, and we're done. Are there any questions? Yep.
Where did the 7 come from exactly?
The 7 of which cell?
Right. It's the size of the unit.
Oh, sadly, right?
Yeah, bar A bar is the number of elements in the array. So in this case, it is 7.
All right, thanks.
So what if someone makes a silly, computation mistake and just mess up this number? Let's say someone put a 6 in here, and everything else is messed up because of that. I will only take 1 point off, one minor point off because of that. Because as long as what is following this is consistent, I will still give most of the credit to that particular answer, so that one step of silly mistake does not really cause the whole thing to crumble. That's the nice thing of partial credit, right? I mean, I'm not just looking at the final answer. It's like, okay, do they all have the correct value? Nope, wrong. 0 points.
It's the concept.
It's the concept. It's both the knowledge, knowing the concepts, and also the ability to apply the concepts. Okay, that is important. All right. So let's save this one as Q3. And we have one more question to go. The last one is kind of interesting because I had a bug in the program. And some people may see the program as it was intended instead of as it is written. So I will give full credit to either case, whether you whether you ran the program as it was intended or whether you ran the program as it was written. So in both cases, you will get full credit.
You get bonus points for doing it as it's written.
I don't know which one is easier, as written or as intended.
Well, if you do it as it was intended, then you do it incorrectly technically.
You're being smarter than the program.
Smarter than the program. Well, it's looking at the intent of the programmer. So let me just kind of go here. And this one can be a little bit long too. Yeah. J got 0. I can't type. In my previous class, I was telling students not to vacuum their keyboards using a shop vac. Yep, exactly. This is where the problem is. Yep, and but it was interesting. I know I'm digressing, but from the previous class, some people said, they know people who do huffing. They huff the propellant from those cans. And then one person said that she knew a person who did that while driving and ran into another car and then killed the driver or the person in the other car, in the other vehicle. So that was really bad. And then I looked up, the effect of huffing, propellant from those cans, and it can cause, serious irreversible damage to liver and kidney. I did not know that. But just looking at the chemical name, tetra, something with fluoro on it, I knew that it's not good. I mean, anything that contains fluoro something, which is fluorine, typically is not really good for people.
Plus, they put a bitter in it for that exact purpose. They try to deter people by making it taste bad. So you have to really want to get high.
As someone who drinks energy drinks, the poorness of the taste doesn't stop anybody.
I guess.
I don't know, that stuff tastes like ass. Like it's really bad.
Energy drinks or propellant?
No, the
Huffing the canned air.
canned air.
Oh, really?
I've
Well,
never
like,
tried
just,
that.
you
Yeah,
know,
it seems like a bad
working
idea.
on- Yeah, every day, just go
You just go
take a can.
little banana
In
spray.
between classes, right before this one.
Paper bag.
In the library.
In the bathroom of the library.
Second floor.
It's all caught on recorder now.
I have
My confession.
I have another morbid story for you about that tag. So
Really?
yeah, when I
They're gonna
was
pull this YouTube video up.
when I was
Remember when you
deployed,
said this?
there was a guy who was huffing canned air because we used it to blow out our computers, obviously, because there's
Mhm.
sand everywhere.
Yeah,
Right.
he committed suicide by huffing 7 cans of it.
Wow.
Yeah. They found him with 7 cans of canned air completely empty around his body. So this shit can kill you guys. Only do it sparingly.
And his probably did not decay quickly
Huh?
either.
Pump full of fluorine.
Slow down the decay of the body.
His teeth were perfect.
Fluoride.
Was he a donor?
Huh?
Just kidding.
Of canned air?
I tell you, anybody who watches this video is never going to touch canned air ever.
As they should not.
At the end, you should put a public service announcement. My name is Dr. Tack. You should never smoke.
And I did not even know that. I mean, until people brought it up. I was just kind of.
into this class or not.
Ignorance is
Share
bliss.
that.
Blissful ignorance.
The reason why I told people not to use canned air instead use an electric blower was strictly for economical reasons, because those canned air does add up in terms of cost. It's not environmental, okay, and it doesn't do a very good job dusting either. If you have tried one of those electric duster blower thing, they are far more powerful compared to canned air.
But you have an air compressor.
Yeah, just because a cheap air compressor works wonders then.
Yeah, but then you have to control the airflow, because an industrial compressor can put out enough air to bend the fins on your CPU cooler
Well, as long as you
and
aren't
rip the
right up to
rip
it.
the blades out of your fan.
Yeah.
Have you tried this?
It takes some
No,
common
no, don't
sense.
ask me why I know.
That's a yes.
I have my own destructive way of having
going
fun.
too slow.
A friend told me.
Now the same thing applies, when you use a shop vac to clean the fans of your CPU cooler and whatnot. That would just rip the blades out, or it would damage the bearing. So the next time you power up the computer, it will be noisy because it just rips all the inside of your CPU fan apart.
See, I've used compressed air just to clean my laptop, but it's you aren't putting it right up to it. It takes a little bit of common sense.
Yes, or you can regulate the
Yeah.
PSI, the pressure of the air coming out of it.
I wish I would have known about the legalness of canned air yesterday because we had presentations. Hold on, we had presentations in my computer science class, and someone was going over how to clean a computer to do whatever, and he sprayed canned air on his hand to show what the propellant looks like, and I'm like, dude, that's deadly poison.
Well, not only is it deadly poison, but you can get freezer burn because of that. If you reverse, canned air and squirt it out that way, the chemical in liquid state will squirt out, and it will immediately try to absorb as much heat as possible, so it can turn into a gas form, and that can cause a freezer burn. It's really that bad stuff. I mean, that's not a good idea to spray it on your hand.
I really wish I could have told that guy that. I wonder, I'm going to have to ask him if he has burns on his hand.
It's like spraying. Well, it's kind of like spraying liquid nitrogen on your hand. I mean,
It's not
as long as you don't
bad.
do it, as long as you don't do it in a great quantity, then you're fine. But no, I've actually used
The liquid nitrogen evaporates.
Yeah.
It evaporates from the air outside of your hand, so it never actually touches it. Whereas the canned air, whatever that liquid is, it probably gets to your hand and then.
Or you can put the nozzle of a liquid nitrogen dispenser right up against your hand and eliminate the evaporation part. Trust me.
Probably.
And liquid nitrogen is
They
cheap
use
too.
it to burn warts off.
Yeah.
I think
It's fun to play with.
last time I checked, I think on a per gallon basis, it's about the same as milk.
All right, I'm officially going to go try to buy a gallon of liquid
And it's
nitrogen.
not poisonous either. I mean, it's just nitrogen, right? I mean,
Somebody at the
air
FBI
has
is
what
70
75% of
70 some
nitrogen.
odd.
It's like
Somebody at the FBI is currently listening to this video.
I'm pretty sure several people in this class are probably on a list somewhere just because of their life histories.
all right. Okay, so we're done with the few steps here. Line 3, line 4, and then line 5 is the one that is in question. Okay, because the way line 5 is written, this is how it's written. Okay, we're comparing A bracket I to B bracket I, but the way it was intended was to compare against B bracket J, because otherwise the whole loop with J makes no sense.
I just kept
Put a J in there.
You did? You put a J in
I
there?
just assumed it was J.
Okay.
I wondered why J had nothing to do with anything, but I just was
Right.
like, whatever, I'm not gonna screw with it.
So you
Don't
trace it
argue
as
with
it is
the
written, and you trace it as it was intended.
Yeah.
Okay. In either case, I would count it as correct. Yeah.
Well, basically, a program could do
Yeah,
that.
forever.
A is all right.
And I never
Because
matched.
Right.
It's dependent on eyes. If
Yep.
eyes what it is.
So okay. So should I deviate here into two branches, or which one do you want me to trace? Do you want to trace it as intended, or trace it as it is written? Trace it as written? Okay, that's kind of boring.
You didn't actually me to think about
There's
it.
nothing will ever match.
Yeah,
You
mine
didn't
never
code my
matched. That's
brain
why
to
mine
think
never
about
matched.
Yes.
Cheaters.
So in this case, okay, all right. So in this case, A bracket I versus B bracket I. Well, okay. If you trace it as it is written, there's one little trick, because at one point it will be array index out of bound. Okay, so if you trace it that way, you have to indicate that condition. So we'll get to that point. Okay, A bracket I, B bracket I is 0. So we're comparing A bracket 0, which is 1, with B bracket 0, which is 2. 1 equals to 2 is false. So this is false. We skip around the whole thing, the whole conditional statement. We end up on line 9. line 9 is going to bump J up by 1, but that just doesn't really do anything. Yep, go ahead.
It never goes out of, if you don't have any matches, does it go out of bounds?
If you
The second
If,
time
if
that
it
you
never
update
matches,
I.
if AI and BI never matches, it won't go out of bounds.
Well, if I is 3, then it's out of
Doesn't go
bounds
out of
for B
bounds.
because there is no B.
yeah, because B bracket I does not exist. B only has all the way up to bracket
Oh.
2. So it will get out of bound because you have no control up to this point. So it will go out of bounds, but you can stop as soon as it goes out of bounds because you can just say, okay, I cannot continue from this point.
It can technically never get out of bounds. Because the second
Yeah,
time,
loop
the
would
second
end.
time you go through and update the value of I again, you'd end up with I equals 4.
Yeah.
And then
great.
Oh, that's right. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
so it's
yeah,
never-
okay.
I was wondering, I was like, wait a second.
You would never enter this.
I was like, I see you're right, but how did I even do it? It's one out of bounds.
Okay.
And you
right.
can never get an odd number for I because I never gets updated by a number that's not even.
Correct. Yep. So in this particular case, it's never right. It's never true. Okay. So because I doesn't change either way in this particular inner loop, so it's going to stay the same, boring way throughout the inner loop.
It is intended.
Yeah.
The way it's intended. Yes.
Forever.
You sound sad.
Doing what you told us, how you taught us,
Well, that's good. Okay. So this is now 3. We go back to
You
last
sound
one.
so disappointed. That's good.
We won't let it
okay.
happen again.
It's like the Visine commercial. Is it Visine, the guy who's really boring?
No,
Yeah.
clear eyes with Ben Stein.
Yeah.
Clear eyes.
Red eye.
That takes some
Still think
acting
I
talent.
missed it.
The most interesting, boring person.
Isn't that guy supposed to be like super smart?
Yeah.
Did you guys know that the actress, who played the nerdy girl in Big Bang Theory?
Oh,
she's actually a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
In real life.
From UCLA. She's a PhD from UCLA.
Yep.
She just spoke at a conference in San Jose yesterday.
Right. Is that the electronic show, right? Yeah. I used to go to that show every year because the company that I work for, we have a booth, in that show, and also the one on the East Coast every year. Yeah. So, but I have not gone there for a long, long time.
What's it make it?
It's like Rowan Atkinson. That guy's like a PhD or 2, doesn't he?
Is he?
The guy that plays Mr. Bean.
That wouldn't surprise
Like
me.
he's like has
He's a
like-
little weird.
He has like a PhD or 2. He's like
Kind of has
ridiculously
to be a
smart.
little funny to have a PhD.
And he runs around as Mr. Bean.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I'm just copying and pasting. Okay, if it's false, we get up to line 11. I guess we'll bump up to 4. Well, I can see there's no match here because we are matching this to here. Okay, 1 equals to 2 is false. These two, do not match. And then this one is the last one.
Yeah.
It would be matched up against this one. That's also false. Let's just make it a little bit more interesting. I can't stand it when it's not, when it's that boring. Oh, actually, I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's good. Too late for that change.
Wasn't the whole thing nothing matched? I was like, oh,
Yep.
all right.
All right, so it's done. Boring, disappointing.
Gambling with student ID numbers, hoping for matches.
Yeah, you can use one that has some matches. If you do have a match, then you print. It does match. Now, the interesting part about when you do have one that matches is the array B should also get modified because you have to put a negative one back into array B. So that's the only part that makes it kind of interesting.
If you were to print match, would you just write it in the comments?
Yeah, just write it in comments. Just say print match or match. So it's fine.
That didn't happen.
Yep. Well, just the indication that you step onto that line 6, is giving me a good indication that you know how the flow of the program is supposed to go, which is more important than the print match on the other side. Yep. All right. So we do have all 4 questions, and now we get back to the homework assignment. All right, so getting back to the homework assignment. Oh, I have not used it for long enough that I got timed out. There are times that I will type my notes and ignore. I'll be writing a note, but it took me long enough to write 1 page. So by the time I hit the submit button, I would have timed out. The first few times it happened to me, I was going like, oh man, I just spent 2 hours of typing something. It's all lost. So later on, I kind of figured that out. So I would use another window or tab to log in again, and then I can submit. Or I would just do a copy and paste, into someplace else, and then log back in and then paste it back in.
You're the Moodle server admin. Just increase the timeout.
But I cannot increase it up past a certain point, for security reasons. Yep.
What is it, like 10 minutes, 5 minutes right now?
I think it's an hour.
Let's say it's way longer than 5.
Yeah, I'd say it's about an hour.
Yeah, I think it's about an hour.
Yeah, I tend to log on, look at something, to go to a different tab, and forget I have the tab open. And then like 45 minutes later, it'll say, you've been inactive.
I think Wells Fargo times me out a lot sooner than that.
30 seconds.
For good reasons. All right, so this is your homework assignment. With the homework assignment, it's kind of interesting. I think somebody, sent me an email and said, but then there's no point because, it's going to print out this value and that's
That
it.
was me.
That was you?
Yeah.
I think you were one of them. There were 2, I think. So basically, the program doesn't do anything really useful, but it is enough for me to evaluate whether you understand passing by value, passing by reference, and returning a value at the same time. Those 2 concepts are quote-unquote orthogonal, which means they are independent of each other. You can have one or the other, or both, or neither. Okay. So let's go ahead and trace this particular program and see what it does. That's kind of long. All right, so we have no conditional statement. We do have 1 print. So I'll just go ahead and have comments here, but I can scroll off the screen for the time being until I need that column back. We have line number and a precondition that has nothing to say because we do not have any global variables. The first line outside of the context, outside of the definition of a subroutine is line 16. And line 16 invokes subroutine main. There are 2 things to do. One is to indicate the return line number. This one is post because line 16 is the last line of the program. The second thing we have to do is to allocate for anything that is local to main. Main doesn't have any parameters, but it does have 1 local variable I. So I needs to get a value of unknown to begin with. And that's the way with C++ programs as well, is when you have a local variable inside a subroutine, they always start with an unknown value, unless it is initialized. So that's why it is important to put a question mark here, just to remind yourself that a local variable starts with an unknown value.
The initialization, would that go on the invoke main line then?
Sorry?
So if you said unless it was initialized, so if you wanted to initialize a variable, then it would be on the line 16. It would say invoke main.
No, it will be on line 12 actually.
Okay.
When you initialize a local variable in C and C++, instead of just saying int I, you say int I equals, in this case 4, which means 4 is the startup value. But it is still the responsibility of the subroutine to initialize the local variable because the invoke statement has no access to the local variable. So that part is still consistent between this class and the next one. All right, so we start execution on line 13, which is the first line inside the subroutine main. All it does is to initialize I to 4. Then we go to line 14. Now line 14 seems kind of complicated because it has 2 invoke statement and then a print. But remember what we talked about in class? You can only invoke one subroutine at a time. So that means, and also in this particular case, I think I said you have to evaluate from left to right. Okay, so that's what we're going to do is to evaluate this expression from left to right. That means we have to take care of the invocation of post inc first, because that's the leftmost invocation. And oops, to do that, we have to use return info, because post inc returns a value. So we have to remember that we are coming back to line 14, but if we're coming back to line 14, we have to remember what else do we have to do on that line. The print is not done yet. The first invocation will be done and replaced by a single value. The second invocation will not be done yet. So for everything else other than the first invocation, I'll just copy it verbatim. Are we doing okay so far with how I set up the return info? And post inc requires one parameter. It requires a parameter x, which is passed by reference. In this case, I'm using my local variable I to pass as a parameter passed by reference to x. Local variable I is using column D, so x becomes an alias of column D. Are we doing okay so far with this? Okay, I'm going to keep column E the way it is right now, because the other part of the print statement or line 14 is not really important. As long as I can see the question mark, that's all that I need to know, at least at this point. After I set up the two columns for post inc, I get into the subroutine starting on line 3. X gets x plus 1, but x is not. I cannot add 1 to x itself, because x is really just an alias of column D. So it is column D that gets incremented from 4 to 5. Is that okay? Because this is really one of the major points that I'm looking for when I look at submissions is are we updating column D, or are we doing something with column F? The answer is we have to update column D and do nothing about column F, because column F is really just an alias. Then we move on to line 4. Line 4 says return x plus 1. X refers to column D. Column D now has a value of 5.
X
Sorry?
minus 1.
Oh, x minus 1, sorry. So we are returning 5 minus 1, which is a value of 4. When we return 4, we have to go to return info, copy and paste it, and change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which in this case is 4. Do we have a question at this point? Nope. Okay. I'm not printing anything, I'm not adding anything, I'm just changing the question mark to 4 at this point. And then we move on to line 5. Line 5 is the end of the subroutine post increment, and there are two things to do again. The first thing is I have to remember where I'm going back to. I would just go ahead and say line 14, because it's kind of, otherwise I would need a lot of width in terms of the column B. So I'll just say that I'm going back to line 14, and this is the rest of line 14 that I have to perform. And then the other thing that we have to do is to deallocate the columns allocated for this invocation. So we just go ahead and mark that as deallocated. And now we are continuing execution on line 14. Line 14 at this point looks like this. Okay, it looks like, it looks like this. I cannot do the printing yet because I still have to finish up the summation, but I cannot finish the summation yet because I still have one more invocation to perform. I have to invoke pre-decrement. All right, so let's go back to here, and then we say that, okay, we have to invoke another subroutine that is returning a value. So once again, I have to allocate one column for return info. Now this time, when we look at return info, I have to copy whatever is resolved at this point, and then the invocation of the subroutine that I'm invoking right now is replaced by a single question mark, but the rest of that line will remain pretty much the same way as before. Yep.
So when I did my alias column, I originally had forgotten to put comments in, and I added the comments column later. Well, obviously that would shift my alias column over to D instead of C.
Okay.
Is that going to line.
Oh, so you, okay,
I did
see.
AK
You did
columns.
not go back and change
Oh, I did the same thing.
alias of.
Yeah.
No, I'm not gonna take any points off. That's conceptually, as long as when you encounter line 3 and line 8, you're still updating what it is supposed to be referring to, I'll still give you credit for that. Yep. All right. So now that this column is set up, we have to set up one more column, because pre-decrement also has its own parameter x, which is also passed by reference, and I'm using the same column to specify. It's an alias of the same column, column D. And then we can go into the subroutine starting on line 8. Line 8 says we want to subtract 1 from x. X is also known as column D. Column D is this column. It currently has a value of 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. And we are storing the 4 into the same column. So it is column D that is now ending up with a value of 4. And we move on to line 9. Line 9 is a return statement. We are returning x. X refers to column D. Column D has a value of 4 at this point. So when I return, I have to copy and paste the return info cell. But this time I'm changing the question mark to 4. So now it becomes 4 plus I. But I'm not doing any computation at this point. I'm just changing the question mark from question mark to 4. Then we move on to line 10. Line 10 once again has two things to do. It looks up the return info cell. We have to go back to line 14. And then it has to deallocate these two columns, like that. Now we are back onto line 14. But when we get back onto line 14 is actually more like this. In other words, we just have to evaluate 4 plus I, and then print it out. There's no invocations left in this case. I is column D. Column D has a value of 4 at this point. So this really becomes 4 plus 4 plus 4, which is 12. And oops, if I scroll over one column to the comments, I'll just print a value of 12 at this point. And then move on to line 15, which is the end of the main subroutine. It's got two things to do. Did I make it? Okay. Any questions? Okay. So we're now on to line 15, which is the end of the main subroutine. It has got two things to do. One is to look up the return line number. It is post. So we put it here just so that we can remind ourselves what to do next. And then the second thing it has to do is to deallocate the two columns that we allocated for this invocation. And then we can continue with post, which means we're at the end of this execution. So are there any questions about this homework assignment? No questions? Okay. How many people resolve the value of I before the very last step? In other words, when we look at the return info cell here, let's see. Okay, when you look at this return info cell, I specifically use variable I here. Did anyone at this point change that I to 4 already? Okay. I'm not going to take any points off because of that, because in the programming language C, it is sometimes it would do that. Sometimes it would actually resolve whatever it can resolve first, and then it will do the invocation. So it is possible that you can get a result just like this. Now, in the end, for this particular case, it doesn't really matter. Okay, it evaluates to exactly the same thing. But if it does evaluate differently, that means you can look at a C program. Okay, identical two C programs, one compiled by one compiler and the other one compiled by a different compiler, and they can give you a different value in this kind of situation, which is really bad. Okay, so things that depend on the ordering of evaluation can potentially cause issues, because when it comes to the programming language, the specification, in terms of the ordering of the operands, the only time where it always enforces from left to right is when there's short-circuited possibility, like conjunction and disjunction. But for addition and multiplication, how the ordering of computing each operand of the operator is entirely up to the compiler. So in this case, it is possible that some compiler can look at the equivalent code like this, written in C and C++, and decide that it wants to evaluate this invocation first, and then this invocation. That is entirely possible. Because if the programming language specification does not spell out that it is always evaluating from left to right for addition, then the compiler can choose the ordering. But because the side effect of these things, the outcome can change depending on the order. Now this one doesn't really matter because I think even if you evaluate pre-decrement first, let's see, if you evaluate pre-decrement first, that becomes a 3, and then the other one, it does change the value. Okay, let's think about it. What happens when we evaluate the pre-decrement first, and then the post-increment, and then I? This will be 3, okay, and then I gets changed to 3 too because of the side effect. So by the time you invoke post-increment, it will just return 3. And then I gets incremented to 4, so it becomes 3 plus 3 plus 4. Yep.
Would a compiler do that though, or would it pick and choose to do one of the like subs before another? Because the reason why I did the 4 first is because it's just a variable. It's not calling anything. It's not doing any other action, so it doesn't really matter in this case.
That is correct. Yep. It's up to the compiler because the compiler can choose the. If the language specification does not clearly say that it has to evaluate in a particular order, then it becomes implementation dependent. So whoever is implementing the compiler can choose whichever way, whichever order, because there's no right way of doing it. So
basically they can choose instead of doing it from left to right, they can do it alphabetically.
They can do it in a random order as long as it is done, and the operator is evaluated in the right order. It'll be fine. Yep.
So you're saying since we're the compiler, you're basically saying you can take whatever order we want to.
Say again?
You said it's dependent on the compiler since we're the ones who are compiling it in the order.
In this class, we are the compiler, so we are interpreting the pseudocode and then performing the operations accordingly. But when you're in C and C++, in cisp300, then your program will actually be compiled by GCC, which is a C compiler. And GCC, unless the programming language, the C standard, the ISO standard of C specifies, every time you have this kind of expression, it has to evaluate from left to right, or from right to left, or whatever order. Then it's up to the compiler to decide, when am I going to evaluate which invocation. And because of the problem of side effect, now if the two subroutines do not have any side effects, then it doesn't really matter. Okay, one way or another, they will come up with the same answer. But because of the side effect issue, the ordering of evaluating those invocations becomes important. Because if I evaluate pre-decrement first and then post-increment, the result of the entire thing is different. Because if you think about it in a math class, addition is called commutative, right? A plus B equals B plus A, right? So that means even if a compiler can choose its order or has a specification of always left to right, if I write this program differently and reverse the two invocations, from a math perspective, it should still come up with the same answer. But from a programming perspective, they do not come up with the same answer because of the side effect of the invocations. Okay? And this is also another reason why global variables are so bad, because in this case there's a side effect, but I can see on line 14 itself, I can see there's a potential problem like that, because I is passed by reference. And every time you pass something by reference, there's always a chance that the subroutine may change that variable. So I can tell right away that, okay, side effect is possible in this case. I have to be careful. if the subroutines make use of global variables, on line 14 itself, I cannot tell that it has any side effect, because the reference to global variable is not shown through the invocation of the subroutine. And as a result, I would not be aware, just looking on line 14, I cannot even guess that those two subroutines can have side effects and the ordering of the evaluation can happen. Is that making any sense? Yep. So that's why, in cases like this, where you're invoking a subroutine and the subroutine has side effects, and there's another subroutine that you're invoking that may be affected by the first one, if the ordering is important, don't write it out like this. Use another variable to explicitly on one line, you say, X gets, invoke post inc. On the next line, you say X gets X plus invoke pre-decrement. So that way, that ordering has to be respected, because a compiler will not change the ordering of statements, even though it can change the ordering within an expression. And that's pretty much is one of the main points of this homework assignment, is to kind of show you guys, about the whole thing about side effect of, invoking a subroutine that accepts, passing by reference. But global variables are even worse because you can't see it from the invocation itself. All right. Any other questions? No other questions? Is anyone going to complain if I give you guys 3 more minutes to get to the next class? Nope. No one's going to demand a refund? I want my money back.